Hello guys and gals, and welcome back to another rant time. Yes, this time we gotta talk about these remasters and these recollections and all these HD goodness in games nowadays. Alright, so if you guys haven't heard, alright, and I've gotten, fucking messages for this, is Last of Us Remastered. Now, if you don't know what The Last of Us is, it is a post-apocalyptic survival game. It's a pretty linear one. It's made by Naughty Dog, same guys who made Uncharted, and it's a very good game. Story-wise, it's a great game. Visually, it's a great game. Audio-wise, it's a great game. I actually thought the audio for that game was fucking brilliant. The soundtrack and the voiceovers and everything in that game was perfect. As far as gameplay goes, it was pretty linear, but to be honest, I'm gonna let that one slide. It was a fucking brilliant game. So what happened is, for those of you who've bought a PlayStation 4, if that's sitting in your home right now, they have a remaster. Yes, Last of Us Remastered for $59.99. Currently, I'm looking in the US PSN store, which you can pre-order from there too. And I think it's coming out this year, 2014. And it promises 1080p, 60 frames per second, improved shadows, and all that other goodness. But I gotta ask you guys a question. Is this really what you want from next gen? Really? See, like at the end of the last gen, right? PS3, 360, we actually had some repackages, but we'll get to that. They had remakes and HD recollections, right? So you could, for example, I have several. I have the Metal Gear Solid HD collection, which came bundled with an HD version of Metal Gear Solid 2, 3, and Peace Walker. Basically what these games were was they took the original game and they had to recode it pretty much and set it to run at 720p, because these games, even on the older like PS3 360, they never ran at 1080p. Some ran at 1080p, I think, but a lot of them, I know the Metal Gear one didn't run at full 1080p. I mean, I'm running it through and it's always down converting it to 720p no matter how much you try to force it, but it was HD nonetheless. It ran at 60 frames per second. It was a recollection of your PS2 games, or Xbox games, or GameCube games. They were remakes. Same thing on the Wii. You got Metroid Prime 1, 2, 3. Yeah, they had the new playstyle. You could actually aim with the Wiimote on the first two Metroid games, which was more than a remaster. And I don't remember one for an Xbox title on the top of my head. But yeah, you had remasters. You had the Sly collection. You had everything. You had a bunch of remastered games. You bought them for $60 or $50, $40, I think at the least I saw one. Shadow of the Colossus you could buy, but they had copies of PS2 games that you could pick up, and you could play it on your PlayStation 3 or any other system in HD. That was a novel concept. And I'll give you my reasons why they had this concept. See, when you take backwards compatibility out of it, if you don't know, the PS3 initially had backwards compatibility because they put the hardware chip in the original Emotion Engine chip in the original PS3s, but that bumped the price up incredibly. So what they did for the Slims was they took it out, or they took it out after that too. So if you have the first PlayStation 3s, the 40 gig ones, you could play PS2 titles just by putting the disc in. If you have a Slim or the newer PlayStation 3s, if you put a PS2 disc in, it says unsupported, disc, unsupported media or whatever. So essentially what happened after that, which I really hated, was the fact that on PlayStation 2 you could pick up PlayStation 2 titles for $10 a pop. If you go back to my Manhunt playthrough, that game I purchased off the PlayStation Store for $10. It was a PS2 version. It ran in a software emulator. And a lot of people were like, well, they had to code it specifically for the software emulator. Not necessarily. And let me tell you why. See, what happens is, there's a group of hackers that uncovered that there is the PS2 emulator that's built into the firmware. So all they had to do was inject a PS2 ISO in or whatever, and you could run any PS2 game theoretically on the PlayStation 3 through that emulator. So it kind of begs the question, why couldn't you easily just back up your own disc into the fucking PlayStation 3 and play games that way? But I'm not here to argue that or whatever. Essentially, these HD collections, is what I'm trying to say, is that they're really, really simple ways for the company to make money over and over and over again. Alright, and that's sort of the fucking thing I hate about gaming. Because if you want a PlayStation 4 now, or an Xbox One, or a Wii U, the library is incredibly small right now. There's not a whole lot of games that are exclusive to those specific platforms. In fact, my most played game on the PlayStation 4 right now is like Battlefield 4, a game that's available on PCs and previous gen systems. Yeah, there are exclusive games like Killzone Shadowfall, which I don't really like, but you know, it's there. They have Knack, they have a bunch of other games, but there's not a whole lot of full-on exclusive. In fact, the only game I'm really excited for, Watch Dogs, is available on PlayStation 3s and Xbox 360s and Wii U and everything. So as of now, there's really no like library of games. And instead of getting more exclusive, newer games, you know, that are more games that have been announced, we're getting remasters, you know. That's sort of the thing that is getting to me, all right, is that we have Tomb Raider's Definitive Edition, we have Last of Us Remastered, and a lot of these games are simple cop-out ways, because a lot of people are like, well, they're putting effort into it. Not necessarily. They already have their source codes and their assets and whatnot. There's not that pre-production and that planning and that, you know, trial and error coding stage that they're doing anymore. It's a porting job that they're doing. They're porting that game from the PlayStation 3 to the PS4. There's not a whole lot of investment. There's not a whole lot of work required to do that as compared to making an actual game. See, what I hate is that instead of doing these remasters, they're not pumping that money that we give them into actual games, you know, instead of, I mean, there are teams working on newer games, but we want to see the newer games, all right? You don't want to buy a next-gen system and not get that steady slew of games for it, you know? And that's the sentiment I'm getting with a lot of people that have a PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. They're not enjoying it as much. I mean, it's been several months since we've been into the lifespan, but there's nothing from the Japanese market that I'm seeing flourishing in besides, you know, Final Fantasy XIV's MMO. Or anything else, rather, and even that's available on PC. I'm looking for the exclusive console titles that you know, we so desperately crave for, and that's sort of my issue with this whole fucking remaster recollection stuff. Because instead of fucking focusing on next gen games, we're getting more and more remasters, and people argue that this is for people that, you know, didn't have a PlayStation 3, or didn't pick up the title, or they didn't get anything. They didn't pick up Last of Us, or they didn't pick up Tomb Raider, and they're getting it on the next-gen systems. That's all fine and dandy. But guys, recollections and HD remasters work because those games are incredibly old. See, when Wind Waker came out with one, not only was that a very substantial remaster, if you've played Wind Waker HD, it's a very, very good look. It's what I would define an HD remaster. Alright, because they've literally changed the way that game looks, and even the way that game feels and even plays. You know, for newer gamers coming into the series or playing the game for the first time. And that game's like 10 years old. A lot of these HD remasters that I pick up and I approve of are 10 years old, because that's, I think, the time span you gotta have in order to make a game, you know, over again. But then again, you have games now with these remasters that literally under a year or somewhat of a year of a release, they're making a remastered version just to cash in on that game. And instead of putting the effort and the time that the money we give them, because remember, you give the money, all right? They're not getting this money from elsewhere. The majority of it is coming from our wallets, and they're not putting that money into games for us to buy again. They're just simply doing it the very low-key, low-risk way of making money. All right, that's pretty much where it is. And I don't really approve of these remasters and recollections, for those of you who've asked me. You know, I mean, they're nice to have once in a while, but when you start pumping them in, even for the popular games, I think that those games should just stay on the platform right there. And, you know, some people want to buy them. They want to buy that game over again, get that for the high def, 60 frames per second. That's great. But think of what you're losing, really. I mean, do you want the newer games to come out? Do you want a new slew of titles? I mean, again, we are several months into the console's lifespan, but do we really want to keep playing games from the older days not even from the older days, like a couple of years ago on the PlayStation 3 360? Do we really want that, or do we want new, fresh experiences coming to these systems? Do we want to play The Last of Us again, or do we want to play something like possibly the spiritual successor to The Last of Us? That's a question I present to you, really, and that's sort of my rant on it. So I think recollections and remasterings are fine, but not if they're for games that are a year old, man. No, come on. That's just too soon. But, you know, tell me in the comments below, what do you think and what your opinion is. Remember, this is all an opinion, okay? I'm not some fact person. This is not a fact, okay? This is just what one person thinks of it. And, you know, present me with your idea. What do you think? Because then again, you probably have better opinions than I do. You might have a whole different way of thinking of it than I do, and that's all great and dandy. That's the fun of the internet. So please let me know in the comments below. But if you like what you saw, like, comment, and subscribe. This is me, Mudahar, and I'm out.